Hello everyone and welcome to YTV. I'm here today sitting down with Mr. John Dickerson, host of CBS News show Face the Nation. This Sunday morning program highlights some of the most important political news and events facing our country and the entire globe. Mr. Dickerson, welcome to YTV and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's our pleasure. So, to start us off, can you tell me a little bit about how you really got involved with the journalism business? What really made you interested?
Well, I wanted to tell stories, so I thought I was going to be a novelist. So I got out of college, and it turns out there's not a job for novelists right away, so you have to get some other job while you're trying to write the great American novel. So I was a secretary for a couple of years, but I was a secretary at Time Inc., which was back then transitioning from what was narrative nonfiction journalism to what we have today, which is a much faster, chopped up thing. But they still told stories. They would write long pieces of news journalism, but they were stories, and they had a kind of narrative pace to it. So as I was there trying to figure out what I wanted to do next, whether it was be a novelist or teach English or go to law school, I then started covering sort of as a shadow reporter what was happening in the news. And that turned out to be really exciting. The stories were interesting, and I thought, well, I can just try and tell these stories now, and that's kind of what happened, and then I haven't looked back.
Now, this might be a little bit of a difficult question, but what would you say has been your biggest mistake as a political journalist, and what did you learn from it?
Writing Donald Trump off at first, not because I didn't think that there was an anger in the electorate that somebody could appeal to. That we've been covering as a story inside the conservative movement since 1992. What I was surprised by is that voters who for so long told us, and particularly conservative voters for so long told us that the one attribute of politicians that they hated the most was when they'd say one thing and then do another. So I was totally blindsided by the idea that the person they would pick to be their tribune would be somebody who has so repeatedly said one thing and done the other, and who changes position sometimes within the same conversation. So I just missed that. Now, I don't know how I could have fixed that, because basically I was basing my assessment of him on everything that voters had told me, and I spent a lot of time going and talking to voters. So normally you cure the kind of cocoon you get into in Washington by talking to people out in the country. But if when you talk to people out in the country that causes the blind spot, that's something I've got to figure out. So I don't know what I've learned from it except that it needs to be fixed.
Okay, that's very fair. That's very honest. Obviously, people are constantly blaming the media, whether it's for not spending enough or spending too much time criticizing Donald Trump, or not enough time, or spending too much or not enough time on the Hillary Clinton email situation. As a historian of political elections, do you feel that this has been consistent throughout history in terms of this idea of blaming the media?
Yeah.
Is this a new phenomenon?
No. We do that. We've done that since the very first election in America, and that's the way it should be, because the media is the one, half the people or whatever team if you're asking tough questions of one party, the opposing party is going to love those questions, but anybody who aligns with that one party are going to hate those questions. So you're inevitably, if you're doing your job right, people are angry at you. So that's fine, and that's a constant thing. I think what happens, though, that's a constant danger that we're seeing again this time, is that people blame the press for outcomes they don't like. A lot of people like Donald Trump. They like them no matter what they hear. People have to deal with that. It's a reality of life. It's not that those people haven't learned some secret special piece of information that will suddenly snap them into thinking the way you do. People don't really realize that. They think that if anybody likes somebody with whom they violently disagree, it must be a failure of the press and not just, the fact that they may, in fact, just like the candidate and what they stand for.
Okay. Now, if this aspect of blaming the press has been something that's been consistent throughout history, what do you feel about the press itself has changed, say, in the last 5 or 10 years?
Well, the context is gone, and two big things are gone: context and prioritization. So in the old days, you had a front page of a newspaper, and if a story was important, it went above the fold, and then it went on the right-hand side, or you had a big headline, and you knew immediately when you looked at the paper what and how the editors prioritized the news in the day. So now that a lot of people get this news through social media or through websites, it's much harder to tell whether a story is the most important story or it's just a tiny little story. And so that's not anybody's fault particularly. It's just that it's harder for readers to understand where a story fits in the day's news diet. And so that leads to a lot of strange interpretations. People either overinterpret the importance of a story, or they think, why are they covering this story when there are 50 other stories they should be covering? Well, they are covering the 50 other stories. You just don't have an immediate prioritization mechanism to show you that actually the story is not the thing they're putting the most importance on. The other is the news cycle is so fast, and the competition for the latest piece of news and also the competition for the most shiny piece of news creates an incentive structure so that people don't put things in context. When things are put in context, they get less interesting, usually.
Gotcha. Do you believe this election is more important than most presidential elections, and if so, why?
If the next 4 years are relatively benign, then the election won't have been that important at all. If we have chaos because somebody is elected who runs the country into the ground, despite the limitations on the presidency, then it will have been a hugely important election. I think that we are at an important time, and I'm not sure a presidential election can solve it. Where we are right now is we have a structure of politics that does not create solutions. It creates kind of conflict that gets stuck. And if you can't break out of and fix that, then that's a problem.
Obviously, you've interviewed a lot of amazing people over the years, but who's the one person you're still itching to have a chance to sit down and talk with?
The Pope.
The Pope. How come?
Well, he's, the leader of a major religion. He also is changing the Catholic Church in this amazing way, which is to bring it back towards the root of Jesus' teachings, which is less structural. It's more working at the ground level. So he's not only a religious leader who would be interesting in his own right, but he's also changing a massive, difficult-to-change institution which affects people all over the world.
So final question, being here in New Haven, what advice would you have for Yale students who are watching?
I think the biggest advice is that don't sweat it. It's going to be okay. To take a little bit of pressure off yourself, because as someone who put an extraordinary amount of pressure on myself at that period in time, some of it was wasted pressure. There's just things sometimes take time. To recognize that things take time and find something you're really, really passionate about. So while you're waiting for your big break, while you're waiting for the thing to happen, you're still doing something you love enough so that every day you're loving it and enjoying it, and you're not always thinking about, when can I get to this next thing?
Well, Mr. Dickerson, thanks so much for your time. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
From all of us here at YTV, thanks for watching.
And in a lot of ways, a lot of them are so obvious that they don't need to be said. We're all looking for ways in which we ourselves can contribute what we are, what we've experienced.
How does being a woman of color affect your school?